3, 2.
Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop Virginia. I'm Bettina Lawton and I'm your host. And tonight we are going to be talking about a topic that more and more of us are having to deal with, either because we have aged into it or because our parents or other loved ones have. And that is talking about late in life or end of life type of decision making that has to be made about our care. And I've got two experts with us tonight. The first is Dr. Alan Dappen. He graduated from the University of Washington Medical School in 1979. He completed his family medicine residency in 1983 at the University of California, Davis in Modesto, California, and has been board certified in family medicine since then. He is an associate clinical professor at Virginia Commonwealth University School of Medicine, Department of Family Practice. He speaks Spanish fluently. Alan is the founder of DocTalker Family Medicine and DocTalker Inc. The Family Medicine Education Consortium awarded them the 2014 Family Physicians Who Are Changing Our World Award, which is very exciting. So welcome, Alan. I want to thank you for participating. And then we also have with us Carolyn Richar. She is an ordained minister and a certified hospice and palliative care nurse. She has worked as a manager director in hospice since 2005. Her personal experience with hospice includes having one grandmother who desperately needed hospice back in the 1985-87 range and was not referred to hospice. Her other grandmother and her stepfather died in hospice care more recently, both having been much more comfortable and supported as they approached the end of their lives. Carolyn is currently general manager for Capital Caring in Northern Virginia. She has a BSN from Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, and a Master of Divinity from Candor Theological Seminary. And I want to welcome you to the show, Carolyn, again. Carolyn was one of my very early guests many, many years ago. So Alan, I want to start with you. So tell us what DocTalker Family Medicine is, and how does your practice differ from any other family medical practice?
About 15 years ago, I started a new medical practice, kind of out of frustration of many things I had experienced practicing medicine for 20 years. The concept, when I was first trying to think of a name for the idea, was from house call to house call. Eventually morphed into the idea of talk to your doctor and DocTalker. I understood at a certain point in healthcare that many of the things that I was seeing in an office should be done with communicating with a patient just directly through a telephone. So the first idea of the practice was creating a communication-centered practice where patients could call me 24/7, and 50% of the time I could resolve their problems. This is a big dilemma in healthcare still, but the Telemedicine Association and many things, including finally the American Medical Association, are finally starting to endorse telemedicine. They're the last holdouts. And so I was talking to the president of the American Telemedicine Association recently, who said there is now a tsunami of interest in telemedicine. So I was one of the first people 15 years ago who said this needs to be a standard of care, that any patient who needs care can pick up a telephone and talk to their doctor. The second part of the practice was that 50% of the time you end up needing to be seen. So that means you come to my office, or we would come to your house to do a house call. So when we first started the idea of the practice, we didn't necessarily think that house calls was going to be a big part of it. But in Fairfax County, we end up being about the only practice doing house calls. And because of the elderly population that's often trapped at home, it's been a very large segment of our practice, is taking care of homebound patients.
Well, most of the, let me backtrack just a little bit on the, so you can do this and telemedicine is becoming more accepted, I guess.
Yes.
Are the insurance companies actually covering that? I know you don't deal with the insurance piece of this.
This is coming too. The reason I've mainly abandoned the insurance companies mostly is there's no payment model for getting paid. So this is one of the reasons. There are several, but that was the major reason why we decided we had to build a practice that didn't let the insurance companies demand how healthcare was supposed to be delivered. So I like to think that we created a model where patients and doctors control the healing environment, and none of the secret partners who are insurance companies and data miners and venture capitalists and other people who are often in the system hiding behind the walls. It's open, like healthcare is really an open cubicle model where what you converse with your doctor becomes open knowledge to these other silent partners.
Yeah, and you think
so
it's actually confidential,
it's
and
not,
it's not.
It's not. And so one of our motives was to say we need to keep these people out of the circle. It's day-to-day healthcare. It's not complicated. It doesn't need all these people there, and all these people add costs and conflicts of interest.
Right.
So we just thought, how do we do that without? So the only way to do that was to say we don't accept the insurance company as the model.
Well, let's see if I can get the folks. Supposedly we're hooked up so that we can put pictures up on the wall behind us, and hopefully they'll let us do that because it's up on my screen, but I'm not seeing it on the going out screen. So we'll see what we can do. What I want to know is a lot of baby boomers are now dealing with aging parents. I hear this from a lot of friends of mine. They're long distance caretakers. They are, even if the parent is just down the road, it's very difficult. So what should we be thinking about? What do we need to know about caring for parents, either when they're in this state where they're still at home, they might be starting to have some issues, but you're sort of looking down the road saying, this is not going to go well.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good way to say it, because this does not go well for many people who haven't thought about it and planned. Okay. So this is a complicated problem. First of all, aging in the country is a huge problem. It's the fastest growing. These are many statistics that keep being repeated. It's the largest demographic in the country growing. Oh, yeah. So it's about 15% of the population now is above 65, and it's soon to be 20% of the population. My group, I keep telling my kids that they better be ready to take care of me. Because
yeah, how does that go?
They're going to have
how well is that working out for you?
They say we're preparing a trip into the wilderness. We'll see how you go, Dad. Yeah. So they're pretty hilarious about it. But I think by 2030, the calculation is that for every retired person, there'll be 3 working people. So there's going to be a huge shift of the number of working people in the society and the number of people that actually are retired. Mm-hmm. And that retired population, the costs are just really scary. The most recent numbers I saw from Medicare was that the average last 2 years of life costs, if you're over 67, which means you've been under Medicare for 2 years, every obituary you read says pretty much this person cost, on average, Medicare dollars alone, $167,000 for the last 2 years that they were alive. And that does not include all the costs that families have to pay that are not covered under Medicare, which is a lot. So it's an extremely expensive endeavor. And so this is a kind of a scary thing coming in America of an aging population. Dementia alone is going to get 1 in 3 people. It's one of the few illnesses in which there's been no change, and there's been an increase of incidence because it's more common as you get older. We've been able to fortunately postpone life and keep the expected life expectancy increasing. So it's gone from 67, that was around 1960, in the 60s. Now I think it's around 74, 75, and that number's still increasing. And that group, as they get older and older, have more and more chances of getting dementia. The incidence rate is 1 in 3 will get dementia, and the cost of this group is really difficult. Caring for this group is really difficult, and there's been no downturn or any treatment or anything that has reduced the chances of getting dementia or reduces the outcome. It's really a progressive disease, which is unstoppable. So most of us imagine we get in this situation. Well, I know I do this as a doctor, knowing better. But my brain says I'll be functional, and I'm 35 here. My body might be getting older, but suddenly 1 minute I'll be dead.
Right.
And I don't ever imagine the fact that I could be, and probably will be, disabled, have a chronic illness, get something that starts taking me down. And most people don't really prepare. They live this, if I exercise and I eat well, and all these other, what are relatively magical belief systems, that this will somehow delay the chances of getting old. But in fact, as we get old, none of those things, it might have postponed your journey, but your journey to getting older and chronic illness and disease and dying is inevitable.
Well, then why did we spend all this money to make us live longer if the end result, I mean, it just sounds so bleak.
Well, I'm going to ask, Carolyn will have a better answer.
I hope so, because right now I'm just ready to go on out of here and say, the heck with all this, why do we keep going?
Eat, drink, and be merry.
This is terrible. This is terrible.
Well, I think the beauty is modern medicine has taken us from dying predictably at in our mid-60s,
right.
Added 10 years and really improved that. We have extended our lives 17, 18% compared to before. And most of that journey is during those 18 years, they were very high quality years. It's just in the end, it's the end part of the journey that becomes difficult.
Well, how do you go and you talk to people, you have patients at all end of the age spectrum.
Yes.
I mean, what do you do to talk to these people? Do you say to them, oh, and by the way, your life expectancy is longer, it's going to be good for 10, 15 out of those 17 years, and then you're just going to tank? I mean, what do you say to these people?
Well, most of them tell me.
Okay.
And I get the messages from many of my patients as they get older of words like, no one can warn you how hard this journey is going to be.
Okay.
At a certain point, there are many metaphors used that they will reinforce to me. So most of this is, I think, is enjoy the journey as long as you can, but there's going to reach a spot where there needs to be preparation for, you're now on a slide. You're reaching an stage where, just like we physically at a certain age can never get stronger,
right.
and we never will run, I think the world's fastest marathoner is like 35 years of age. And after a certain age, you can never do anything better than that. And slowly you reach a spot where you're never coming back. You're on a spot where you can hope to maintain, but it's going to start sliding downhill.
So do you, when patients come to you and say, or when you observe that somebody is starting to have some issues, how receptive are people to hearing that? Do you call in like family or suggest family come in to have these kind of meetings, or is it just you and the patient trying to deal with it one-on-one?
Most of it's the patient and I dealing with it one-on-one, and many times it's kind of and this would be a specialty in its own of trying to create a specialty where people kind of somewhat do better preparing for this stage. That we mostly get called in when it becomes an emergency, when families are stuck at home with a loved one who's in trouble and has been unwilling to leave and gotten stubborn or something and say, I'm not leaving, I'm staying home, and whatever happens, happens.
Right. And that I have a number of people that I know who are in that situation with their parents and they can't get them out. It's the family home, they can't get them out. Well, gee, we're so encouraged right now. But we are going to go to break and we will be back. We are here with Dr. Alan Dappen and the Reverend Carolyn Richar, and we will be back after the break to continue the conversation, this time talking to Carolyn, hopefully more positively.
How long do we have?
Around the world, 1 out of every 3 women will be beaten or otherwise abused in their lifetime, often by a family member or loved one. A future free from violence. It's all she's ever wished for.
Did you know you have the power to stop children from joining gangs? You can help a father find a job and home for his family. You can assist a woman who can't afford the medicine she needs to live and the home she can't live without. You can choose to make a difference in our community. Support Volunteers of America, and you can help improve the lives of nearly 2 million Americans each year with programs and services that help individuals and families overcome their challenges to become as independent as possible. Support the programs that are working in our community. Contact Volunteers of America today. Call 1-800-899-0089.
For some folks, saving for the future is easy, but for you, it might take a little more effort. Saving for your future is your responsibility. And there's a lot to save for,
I never thought of that.
like your child's education, perhaps uncovered medical expenses, or just to be sure you can live the way you want when you retire. The time is now to save for tomorrow. Save now or work forever. The choice is yours. Choose to save.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. I'm Bettina Lawton. I'm your host. This is Inside Scoop. We are talking end of life, near end of life, decision making, caregiving, and we are going to start this segment talking with the Reverend Carolyn Richar. She is with Capital Caring, formerly known as Capital Hospice. So if I slip, that's my fault. I want to talk about the homebound patients and what do you do to keep them at home? What do you do in Capital Caring when you're dealing with the homebound patients? What is palliative care anyway? I hear that phrase all the time.
Palliative care is one of the newer branches of medicine with fellowships and board certification, but it's the practice where physicians go and work with people who have a chronic illness and a symptom related to that, and it's an illness that is likely not curable, although it might be in some cases, but heart disease or lung disease, or maybe they're having trouble breathing. They're very tired. They're finding themselves stuck in that homebound position and just struggling to breathe at times. And so the physician's going to come in. He's not going to focus in or she on that disease, but what can I do to help this person breathe more easily? What treatments can I offer them in that regard? And sometimes it's homebound patients, and sometimes it's people who are still very active and even out in a work setting.
I thought that the palliative care and the hospice care had a time limit on it, that you had to be like, somebody had to say you were going to die in 6 months or something. What?
Palliative care does not. It is often used in the last 2 to 3 years of life, but sometimes we work with patients who are having treatment for cancer. They may be having radiation or chemotherapy, and a palliative care physician would see them to help counteract the side effects of the treatment. They might be cured. They may come out of that and live another 20 years, but in the midst of that treatment, they might be pretty miserable. And so the palliative care physician helps make that more livable. A lot of our patients, though, do have side effects for, again, heart disease, lung disease, and it's not going to be cured. But the palliative care physician can help keep that quality of life higher until that period where they're about 6 months out from the end of life, and that's when hospice becomes the next intervention for people.
So a palliative care doctor then isn't about curing whatever the person has. It's the comfort level, is it pain management type things?
Pain management, yes. Again, not for people who fell off a roof and have chronic pain related to that, but people who are having pain perhaps from progressive rheumatoid arthritis or diabetes can lead to a lot of pain.
So it's that incurable piece is the key to
the disease itself,
Okay.
Perhaps also it has more of an element of the art of medicine rather than the pure science of medicine.
Let's see if I can do our next one. There we go. Look at that. We have our palliative care slide on. So you've got sort of palliative care heading into hospice care on this slide. Is that the inevitable? I mean, I thought you said that there could be a cure on some of these
There might be.
things.
Someone suffering from cancer might be cured or might reach a point where their cancer itself has become a chronic illness.
Okay.
And so they might be receiving ongoing palliative care. A prostate cancer patient might have prostate cancer for 20 or 30 years.
Okay.
So.
Okay, and this is, I want to make sure we show this, because this is the chronic, and progressive is the other thing. So as you said, the chronic pain, somebody falls and hurts their back, that's chronic, but it's not necessarily progressive.
Right.
So that's not.
There are pain, there is a different type of physician who is certified for that type of need, the chronic pain patient.
Okay. All right, so nausea, shortness of breath, extreme fatigue is kind of the keynoters are there. So who can do that? You said you can be certified in palliative care?
A physician, Actually, like most things, any physician can say, hey, I do palliative care. And there is a primary palliative care where it would be true in terms of any physician that I go and see. I might say, hey, you know, doc, I'm hurting here. And the doc could say, oh, well, here's...
Take 2 aspirin.
Take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning. Yeah, that's primary palliative care. But for the general physician is not trained in the depth of the pain management, the symptom management that the board-certified palliative care physician receives. It's a year-long fellowship dedicated just to working with patients, the sickest of the sick patients. How do we get these symptoms under control?
Okay. So Ellen, if you're doing house calls and you see somebody who's got the nausea, the shortness of breath, these kinds of things, do you all in your practice do sort of the initial phases of that, or do you automatically call in somebody who's a specialist, or how does that work?
No, usually we handle a lot of those services, so we practice a lot of palliative care.
Okay.
So, so if we think there's someone who's more qualified to do a certain thing, sometimes a mental health specialist or someone who we know in the community, we'll bring them in. When it comes to the house call practices, though, there aren't that many physicians who are going to go.
Right.
So we end up becoming the kind of the palliative care experts by default.
And that is, I guess, one of the things we've added in is that we do make house calls. So we are there as that backup specialist. If DocTalkers needs that, they could call on us, and one of our physicians or nurse practitioners will go to the home and see the patient also.
Okay. Okay, so what do they do? What can they do in terms of the palliative care? Let's see if I can get it going the right way. Here we go.
A lot of things has to do with making sure we know pain, for instance. What kind of pain are we talking about? Those 2 aspirin may not work at all if my pain is related to nerve damage. I might need a totally different treatment. And so it's making sure, do we know what type of pain it is, where it's started from, and then starting a level of treatments and moving on. A lot of physicians also are very reluctant to move past some very, what would one say? Narcotics.
Yeah, Schedule II drugs.
Schedule II drugs, and our
regulated.
physicians are very comfortable with using them and using them at much higher doses if that's what's needed. For some of our patients.
Because there was that controversy a number of years ago where there were a lot of physicians who were handing out the Schedule II, the OxyContins, those kinds of things, and ended up in jail because they were just handing them out like, you know, Skittles or something.
And the FDA has gotten much stricter, and there is a lot of scrutiny now over doctors and what they prescribe. Our doctors, because they're board certified, again, not only are they more comfortable, but also they're looked upon as being the experts, and they're not given that, how would one say, their opinion is looked upon very favorably in terms of what a patient needs, usually.
Okay, and so you've got that.
We've got those different interventions. We actually have an intervention center in Loudoun County where we have a physician who can go in, and rather than give a lot of pills, for instance, perhaps there might be an injection, and again, for a patient with metastatic cancer who may be having a lot of pain related to a tumor is pressing on a nerve. If you can go in and do a treatment to stop that nerve from being able to transmit the pain, then that patient might not need to take all these medications, and it might improve their quality of life for several months at a time.
Oh, okay. Now what about because you also in hospice, you have chaplains, and is that considered part of the palliative care, the psychologists or the social workers?
It is. We do. Our social workers can come in and work with the family to say, okay, what types of community resources are out there that might be of help to you at this point in time? What do we recommend? Where do you stand with the legal things? You know, have you had your advanced care directives talk yet with somebody? So they do that. The chaplain can help with any spiritual distress or helping get in faith communities, perhaps, to help from a particular group that might be wanted. And then we do have telecaring. And yes, we do have telecaring both in palliative care and in our hospice. And so they can do a call, usually with a palliative care patient, it's once a week, just to say, how are you doing? How are things going? You know, to just check in. How did that medication, we changed medications. How are you feeling? They might call a few days in a row on that.
Okay. And so there's no expectation on a palliative care person of actual cure. So do your doctors, the palliative care doctors, then work with whomever? I mean, if somebody's undergoing the cancer treatment, that
they work with the oncologist. In fact, a lot of oncology practices are now bringing in their own palliative care physician just to serve on their staff, and some of our physicians have gone into those types of positions itself. So.
And is palliative care, is that primarily something that you do with the older patients? Is this sort of another one of these aging things that
probably the majority of the people
majority,
are, if you look at, I'm sure it applies to anybody of any age if they get into chronic pain management. And palliative care overlaps in many kinds of things in healthcare. Everyone fights, so it's kind of, we have these famous turf battles, like, so you have chronic pain management people, and I'm sure that they say, well, I'm more qualified than a palliative care specialist for pain medicine. So, but there are many people who are well trained through, and I get to be the kind of guy who everybody's mad at, because everyone says, well, you're not a specialist in any of these things, you're the generalist, so don't, anyways, but many of these things can be handled by someone who's experienced and had a lot of practice with different kinds of, so there are many kinds of specialists that will handle chronic pain, palliative care being one of them,
Right, because that's really what I thought palliative care was pain management.
It is just, there is a separation between the chronic progressive illness that causes the pain or the person with an injury that is going to be in a whole different ballgame, so to speak.
Now, you had mentioned just a minute or two ago about talking to people about have they gotten their paperwork put together. Is that a normal course of dealing with people if you're getting into the whole palliative care aspect, as opposed to just house calls on somebody you expect to get better? Or
I think most fields of medicine these days require at least the question, do you have an advance directive? And so almost any place you go, if you check into a hospital, most physician practices are going to ask you that up front. But many don't go beyond just that question and, oh, you don't, okay, move on, or you do, okay, where's the paper? In our case, we really encourage people to have that discussion if they haven't had it already, to say, what are your goals of care? What do you want? Do you want curative treatment no matter what up until the very last breath? Would you prefer to have treatment related to comfort and quality of life and forego perhaps hospitalization or forego the ICU? Or what types of treatments and interventions do you want, so that we can honor that and respect that?
Now, one of the things that I always thought about, and I think you or your partner may have told me this at one point in time. You can't in advance, is this right? You can't in advance have a do not resuscitate issued. Is that right? It has to be within a certain time frame or something?
No, I think you can. They may expire. I don't know the legality of how long it takes, but they're good for a long time.
Okay.
The advantage of a do not resuscitate is it can be ripped up at any moment. So you can sign one, but then rip it up instantly if you don't want it anymore.
And do doctors have to, you have to sign it, or can the person? Yes, I thought there was something that required a doctor. It wasn't like medical directives where the person signs it and it's good. This requires an actual doctor to sign that.
Yes.
And is there some requirement that the person be imminently, well, I mean, why do the doctors have to sign it?
That's a good question. I'm not sure.
If I don't want to be resuscitated, why do I have to get you to agree with me?
Well, you can sign an advance directive that says, I don't want to be resuscitated. And in a hospital, they would take that into account, but it's a physician's order.
Okay.
So
that's the way it has to work.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we are going to be going to break, and then we're going to come back. We're going to talk some more about this end-of-life decision-making and care, and the types of medical practice that exists out there that people can try and hook into through DocTalker or Capital Caring or any of the other folks here who do this kind of work. So stay with us. We'll be back.
Art, a universal language, an expression of culture.
See, I took us away in 1 second, because that was the half break.
Thanks to Empowered Women International, a way for emerging and established immigrant and refugee artists and artisans to find hope to earn a living while enriching the lives of all of us. Empowered Women International, making a better America every day. For more information on Empowered Women International's educational programs or to make a tax-free donation, contact C. Fripp at AOL.com.
think it would be easy to tell which kids have trouble with their eyesight. But that's not always the case. Even though 1 in 4 children may have a vision problem, eye doctors tell us the symptoms aren't always so obvious. We do know that 80% of all childhood learning is visual. And without good vision, kids can have trouble learning to read and may fall behind in school. For clues on how to spot the real-life signs of childhood vision problems and what parents can do, visit checkyearly.com. A public service message from the Vision Council of America and Reading is Fundamental.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. I'm Bettina Lawton, your host. This is Inside Scoop, and I am here with the Reverend Carolyn Richar and the Dr. Alan Dappen, and we are talking about end-of-life decision-making. And we're going to sort of move to the decision-making part, talk about how you get your family involved. I think that's a very difficult topic to do. But let's talk about, there were 2, you told me, and we have a slide on this. Yes. There are 2 basic types of medical care in the 21st century. So why don't you talk about that, and then we'll talk about which one works better on the issues we're discussing.
So one of the interesting things that's happened in primary health care is that doctors, internal medicine, family doctors, have gotten really specialized at handling the 5 and 10 minute problem. This is what insurance models have been built to do, is to bring people in large volumes and solve every problem in 5 and 10 minutes. So this really works well for poison ivy and urinary tract infections and simple, straightforward things. This model does not work well at all when you have problems with end of life and complicated social interactions and many hard to make decisions and many things to review. To do that in the 5 and 10 minute model would take you weeks to bring the patients back and forth, and you'd spend all time trying to catch up on what you'd forgotten. So, so the difference in this kind of model is that you really need large blocks of time with the patient and or with the family, preferably a lot of times with family members who are sharing in the decision making, so that you can actually have open discussions about a lot of these things.
How many doctors are actually willing to do that? Because insurance isn't going to cover that. And so even if I were to come to you and I pay you personally and then I submit it for insurance, they're going to say, oh, you spent an hour with Dr. Dappen talking about this. Well, nothing. I mean, how many doctors are actually willing to do that?
Well, this is why it's a very difficult business model, in that many people basically want the insurance to cover everything.
Right.
And the doctor's really in a business model that's only profitable if they get everything done every 5 or 10 minutes. So it's very difficult to find a physician or a medical group that's willing to do it. If they do it, they're going to lose, they're going to go out of, if they do it and they have to get paid by the insurance companies, they're going to go out of business, or they're doing it out of the goodness of their heart.
Okay.
So this is why we're one of the few businesses left, because we don't do it completely from the goodness of our heart. We are trying to make a living doing it, but we also try to give people the time to help make the decisions and kind of arrive at, a little bit like a lawyer. A person hires you to, and it takes a certain amount of time to put all the pieces together.
Right.
And so that's, in many ways, I look at our business model in a similar way. We, that I often compare ourselves, so we're like a certain way like a lawyer trying to help you navigate the healthcare system, which is highly complex.
Oh, it is.
And can't always be done in 5 or 10 minutes.
Well, Carolyn, is this something is there any part of Capital Caring that sits down with people and does this as well and talks about what do you want, what's your end of life, get the family in?
It is. It's one of the first questions we ask when our very first visit is, tell us about your wishes in terms of DNR. Tell us about your wishes in terms of life-sustaining treatments, and your wishes in terms of, do you want to remain in the home setting? Would you prefer to go to a hospital setting? Where is it that you want to be once you're at the end of life? So it's a discussion we have every day with all of our patients, not every time we see them, but ongoing, because we've also found that over time, someone might start out in one place, but they might have changed their mind over time.
Well, how do you get the parents in? Because in my practice, my law practice, I will always say to folks when we do advanced medical directives, this is about my client getting done what they want to have done.
Exactly.
It's what you want. As you said, what are your wishes? And have you talked to the person you're naming? And 9 times out of 10, they've never talked to that son or daughter who is either the first level agent or comes in after a spouse. How do you get them to actually have those conversations? Do you call in the family? I mean, you'd said most of the time you're one-on-one. How do you get that to work?
Well, I'm not sure there's an easy answer to that. As I had said earlier in one of our things, you almost need almost a new profession that tries to get families focused on this question, and how do you bring them together? I mean, in a certain way, the medical profession and our professions try to help people with these questions in advance, but it's like retirement planning and many other forms of planning. Many people don't do it.
Does this work easier if you're in the house call setting? Because you're presumably more than one person is there. Is that an easier way to
because
do
often
that?
somebody in the family is there, often the power of attorney. So that is a very good point, that in the house call you can often start, the two people who are important to talk with, which is the power of attorney and the patient, are in the same room, and you can start having a conversation about this. Hospice is awesome at this too. This is their day-to-day job, which is to go in and try to sort a lot of these details out.
Right, because you deal a lot with the families.
We
in
do, and
hospice.
we're very comfortable asking the questions. I think for a lot of people, it's just getting that first question started, and that, am I going to offend somebody or not? And for us, it's pretty easy to say, look, we're already in here. Let's talk about these things now, and let's talk about them before somebody is at death's door and you're trying to decide, do I call 911 or not? Let's make it when it's a little less emotional, and we can look at what this person wants, what their life, if they can't tell us, then what does their life tell us they would want?
Okay, so how do you, if the family is doing this, I mean, what do you give them in our first segment you were talking, it was very depressing. You were talking about you get to a certain age.
I'm a very optimistic person.
I know you are. That's why I was so amazed when you said, well, you get to a certain age, you're never going to be as good as you were before. It's like, I mean, are those the kinds of conversations you're having, with folks? And when you say, what do you want done? Because, oh, by the way, you'll never be what you were. I mean, how does it all work? What kind of conversations when you talk to families do you have, realistically speaking?
When I go into a home, I'm assessing several things at once. Many times these people are quite debilitated by the time I'm in the home. So there's a certain spot where you realize they're starting to have significant health problems. Easily 40% of anyone 65 and older already has some form of a medical disability. Wow. So the number of problems start accumulating as we get older, and so having done the job a long time, when I walk in, I can get a certain feel pretty quick of, is this person mentally competent? Is their memory intact? Are they capable of making their own decisions? And kind of where do they sit in terms of the idea of, if things start to go bad, what do they want to have done?
Are people more open to it once they get to be older? Because I always think, children think that they're immortal, and they stay that way for a long time, well after they've ceased being children. But when you start to get that disability that you're living with every day, are people more willing to have those conversations?
I'm going to say yes. Okay. Many of them want to have this conversation. Many of them have reached a spot where they know that things are going bad, and they know they're not coming back.
Especially if they've been in the hospital. If they've gone through a hospital experience, a lot of them are like, I don't want to go back ever to that kind of experience if I can help it.
And just one last comment on that, which is that there's been amazing surveys between doctors and nurses asking end-of-life questions, and then asked to the general population of what would you want to have at the end of life, and the differences are black and white between the two groups. The general population that has done my job as a doctor working in ICUs, hospital settings, basically say, never, never, ever let me end up in a hospital. The people who have been, they are brutal systems for people who are in the end of life. And this is why, one of the reasons why hospice services are so amazing, is they help give people a choice to not end up being, in a certain way, tortured at the end of life, and allow people to have dignity and peace and comfort, and bring compassion to end of life, which is an inevitable process of living. And hospital systems are very aggressive, and their job is to is to do everything possible many times, and they're not nice places for people who are older. So I love the data when these studies get done, that anyone who's experienced what it's like to be in a hospital, when they look at their own life and have been doing this job and doing it to other people, immediately say, don't ever let that happen to me. And they give strong instructions to their family members, is never ever let that happen to me.
Wow.
So the data is pretty black and white on that.
But our general public has had so little experience in dealing with death and being there. In my grandmother's day, I mean, people were at home when they died, and that was just a part of life. Now they aren't, and people's experience is often what they see on TV. And they tend to think, well, on TV they do CPR, and you know, three out of 4 people pop back up in 5 minutes and go right back to life.
Right after the commercial, they're
right
back.
You know, and of course that's not real life, but people don't know that.
The statistics on surviving a CPR event is 2%, of which the people who have survived end up often with a major disability. So there's a real difference between perception and reality.
Well, are there, does Capital Hospice, for example, do they have like a cheat sheet that says your chances of surviving CPR is 2%, and even then you could have a major disability? I mean, how does this information get out? Because certainly those are one of the things that I think inform folks as to, do they want to take, because I think a lot of folks start with that, oh, do everything because if I can survive, I want to survive. And then when you start to talk with them about, well, okay, so here's how that works.
We do. We have a book that we give out called Making Hard Choices in Love, and it gives people the data and the statistics on CPR, on artificial feedings, on the PEG tubes that people think, oh, well, this will help. You know, and actually it does not extend life. People end up dying at about the same time with or without it.
And see, that's amazing to me, and that's the type of thing that I think if people know about, and of course many years ago I was a speaker for Capital Hospice at the time, and so I went to all this training, and so I knew about the CPR statistic, and and I knew there was a problem with the whole feeding tube notion, that somehow this was the cure, this was going to keep you alive in great shape, no deterioration until they found that cure. And you start to realize, when I would say this to my clients, do you realize? And they would be kind of like, what? And you know, how are you going to pay for this indefinite keep me alive thing? It's really quite shocking to many people to think this isn't just somebody's going to pay for this but not me. You know, somehow.
Yeah, there's a magical belief that somehow it's going to get paid for.
Right, and they don't understand. No, it's not. It's not.
We pay for it. You know, one way or another, we all pay for it.
We all pay for that, and I think that it's important for people to really understand what the chances are when they get towards making those hard decisions, and I think it also would help the families in being willing to implement those decisions, to realize you're not giving up on somebody when you say, okay, they don't want to have CPR, because the chances of them actually surviving as they were before is so little.
Less than 2%.
Is less than 2%, which is just...
and helping people realize it's not giving up, it might be letting go. It might be letting go of some magical thinking, but it's not giving up on the person.
Well, we seem to talk a lot about magical thinking so far in this show. This is just a little discouraging to consider it that way, but you're right. I mean, it is. So, well, we are going to take our final break, and then we will be back to finish up talking about end-of-life decision-making. Stay with us.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. One in some matches, and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about $3,000, nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches, don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Why don't you just wash your car at home?
When I wash my car, everything runs down the street and down into the storm drains. With all the chemicals in the soaps and waxes, the last thing I want to do is poison my own drinking water. At least here, it's all contained and recycled on site. That's why I also take my car in for oil changes instead of doing it myself. I might take a chance on spilling stuff. You know what the best part is?
What?
More time to kick back and watch the game.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow!
Maybe there's another way.
People, the flood is imminent! Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
Somewhere around the world, there are men and women of the armed forces risking their lives, helping rebuild communities after natural disasters, collecting toys for needy children, tutoring kids in school. These are your sons and daughters who work to keep us safe, secure, and free. Dedicated men and women who put their country first.
Saving for retirement might be easy for some folk, but for others, it might take a little more work. And for those who...
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm Bettina Lawton. I'm your host, and we are talking about end-of-life decision-making with the Reverend Carolyn Richar. She is with Capital Caring, and Dr. Alan Dappen. He is with DocTalker Family Medicine in Vienna. So I want to talk about something that's called a MOLST or a POST. I guess a MOLST, the medical orders for life-sustaining treatment, but in Virginia it's called something different. It's called a
physician.
POST.
Yeah, physician orders for sustaining treatment.
Okay, so what are these things?
These are, and I think there's state differences. So the MOLST is usually used in Maryland.
Okay.
The POST is a more simplified form that's used in Virginia. It's quite new, the POST, relatively new, and the idea is to give physicians better guidance on end-of-life decision or for helping guide therapy. One of the things one of the statements I always love when I talk to my emergency room friends and we get into these conversations, I often will ask them, well, what does a medical advance directive mean to you? And they will say, it means I am doing everything and I'm going to let someone else sort out what I'm supposed to do. Yeah. I don't have time to read it. It's too complicated. I don't have a copy of it. I don't know where it is. I am going to do everything possible, and then once they're in the ICU and intubated and we've checked them and done everything we can, somebody else can figure it out.
Wow.
So they are not effective documents for helping really give people what they had actually planned on doing.
Okay.
So these new documents are much more simplified, and they really speak doctor talk rather than legal talk. The advanced directives are if you know there's vague terminology of if there's any hope or and these are not definable for doctors. So doctors, if a person has one of these POSTs or MOLST forms, and patients are encouraged to fill one out, and doctors are now and we often will have our patients fill one out as well. It is a single page. I think the MOLST is several pages, but very simple questions like. Do you want anyone to resuscitate you? So one of them is like a do not resuscitate order that we often call a DNR. Right. So it includes a DNR question like, do you want someone to do resuscitation? Do you want someone to breathe for you or pound on your chest or electroshock? So it goes through those. If you are a certain level of illness, do you want IV fluids? So it helps the physician then see in a rapid way what do they want to have done. So if you show up in an emergency room, your primary care physician can actually send a copy of that through the electronic medical record system and review with the doctor what their care wishes are.
So do you do this when you meet with patients? Because if I'm sitting there as an attorney saying, so do you want to be shocked? They're not going to really know. And I'm not in a position to say, well, here's what happens if you have the shock. So is this when it says physician's order, this is you folks, you guys control this, you guys have these conversations?
Yes.
This is specifically a doctor having the discussion because it is a physician's order. It is signed by the physician at the end.
So is this a standard thing? If somebody comes in, I come into you as a new patient,
no.
You're gonna, so what triggers this then? How does this work?
Well, yeah, and I think that what's trying to happen on a state level and perhaps a national level is to get everyone to fill one of these out.
Right, well how am I gonna do that if I don't know?
I'm gonna say no only because I'm not doing it as a routine, even though perhaps I should be. We should perhaps have everyone fill one out, but sometimes it requires a fairly prolonged conversation which
is the problem.
Which is a problem, right? And so, so as a result, we're just kind of using it at times when it seems appropriate to start talking about this.
Okay.
We are moving to use it in hospice with every one of our hospice patients, just because it makes it easier. Again, some families do want, or patients do want to use 911, but they may only want certain things done once they get to the emergency room. And so this allows the doctors to, again, have that discussion. That form can be right there in the home, a copy of it, and can be brought with the patient to the emergency room. If they perhaps fall and break a hip and they want that hip treated, but maybe they don't want to be shocked if their heart stops.
Ah, so you can make those kinds of actual
subtle
choices.
Things. And sometimes they have dementia, so the power of attorney has to speak for them. So it actually gives the power of attorney direction also about what they should and shouldn't do.
Okay, but they could stand alone. You have this post thing, somebody calls 911, you bring it with you, or is it stored? I know there's the medical directives in Virginia now have a registry that some people are using, which supposedly is accessible to doctors and hospitals. Is this thing, you have to have the piece of paper with you, or is it also accessible?
I think that the hospitals are trying to keep copies of them in a certain part of the medical record, so they know.
Okay.
Yeah. So if they have one filled out,
so if they pull up my name, I go to Fairfax Hospital and I'm in the emergency room, and I've already have one on the registry with them in their forms. They could just punch in my name, and it might automatically pop that up and say, "Oh, here's Carolyn Richar's post form."
Right.
Okay. Okay, well that's interesting.
So one other thing about these forms too, which I always try to tell when I'm giving people this, is these decisions you're making are completely reversible. So when you sign that you don't want to be resuscitated, what this does is it gives you protection so that if someone calls 911, a lot of times happens is the 911 and the medical system is obligated by law to take action. And so a DNR, do not resuscitate order, makes it so that if they show up, you can hold the form up and say, look, we don't want to know if there's anything to do, but we don't want you to resuscitate them, right? So they can stop otherwise they have to put you in the ambulance by law and take you to the hospital and pound on you and do whatever they're going to do. And we've had people wake up at some point and yell at, of what did you do to me? I didn't want that done.
Right.
I was dead. Why? I was not breathing.
It's time to go.
Anyway, but the form is, if you've signed it, is completely reversible by the power of attorney or by the person who signed it. So if you say, I broke my hip and I thought I didn't want to have anything done, and it said so, it's like, hey, forget that thing, and you rip it up and you can change your mind instantly.
So can the power of attorney, can the agent under your medical directive, if it says, I broke my hip but don't resuscitate me, can they countermand that in the emergency room, or does
only the power of attorney can.
Power of attorney. So you still have to have that conversation. Okay, so what's the yes but?
The yes but is technically they should not override the patient's decision.
That's correct.
Because they are empowered to do what the patient wanted to be done.
Right.
So if I say I want one thing and now all of a sudden I can't speak for myself and my husband is trying to say, oh no, I don't care what she said, I want you to do this anyways. Technically, the doctors are supposed to say, no, this is what's down legally, this is what we're going to do. Now, in reality,
I was going to say the reality
is often quite different.
You end up doing but yeah, you want to choose a power of attorney that believes in what you believe in for your end-of-life decision. So that they will uphold it.
And that goes back to the conversation we had of you have to talk to people and tell them what you want and make sure they can do it. I mean, I've had clients where the person they thought they would name as their agent had brain cancer when they were 18 and they were supposed to be dead in 2 years, and now they're 34. And I said to my client when this happened, I said, but this person's life experience says that you're going to survive. You will beat that death sentence. So asking that person to let you go, why do that to them? Number one, because that's just not the way they are. But number two, the likelihood of you getting done what you want done isn't very great in that circumstance. I mean, you need to talk to somebody who can you need to choose somebody who can do what you want to have done.
We really try to encourage people to have that whole family discussion, not certainly with the power of attorney is extremely important. But beyond that, because you don't want to get a family into a situation where I'm saying, but mom wants this and I'm the person who makes the decision, but my two siblings over here are saying, no, we want mom to have this other type of treatment instead, and getting into these family fights where we can have this all discussion and we can all hear mom say to all of us, this is what I want, this is my decision.
Right.
One of the earlier I'd kind of said there needs to be a specialty for handling this question, and I'd kind of overlooked a huge group of people who really are specialists at this, who are geriatric care managers. And I kind of apologize for overlooking such a huge service of people who really understand the healthcare system and the financial system and the legal forms, and can really come in to help families make decisions and guide them through, here's the doctors, here's the lawyers, here's the care facilities, here's how it costs, because of your being under a veteran, here's what's covered, here's what's not covered. Their knowledge is amazing. And I remember hearing an interview on National Public Radio of a woman who had taken care of her mom for 2 or 3 years before she died, and she wrote a book, and they asked her, what were the biggest lessons you learned from this? And she said, I learned that I needed a geriatric care manager and a physician who could come to my house. Probably a lawyer, I would add on there too, Bettina.
Boy, thank you.
And connected with hospice.
Connected with hospice.
But I thought those were I really, having done this job for 13 years of really being in people's homes a lot, I really thought, man, that is really wise advice in my view.
Well, and that really just also strikes me. I know that there are a lot of books coming out now that people are writing about end of care things, and while they can tend to be difficult books to read, they really do have these sort of gems of wisdom to try and help people not have the problem.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about hospice. We've now gotten through everything. What's hospice going to do for us? We're not going to get any better.
Hospice is going to say, what is it that brings joy and meaning into your life, and how can we help support that? How can we help make whatever time it is you have left here as wonderful, as comfortable, as filled with what you want as possible? So, do you want to save your energy up rather than going into the hospital, rather than going to the doctor's office and all? Do you want to save your energy to be with your family, to maybe go out to a favorite restaurant, to have a big family gathering, to go fishing or go to a baseball game? What is it that is going to make every day a day to look forward to?
So if you go into hospice as a patient, are you basically accepting or making that decision that says there's no point in any more treatment? I just need to.
No.
I'm headed
Actually,
down the road.
We have a number of people who come into us who are still a full code. They still, if there's a curative treatment that becomes available, they want to have access to that. Okay. Some of them even are hoping that maybe if they can get a bit stronger. And actually it's interesting, when people come into hospice, they do tend often to have what we call honeymoon period, where they might be feeling better and feeling a bit stronger. It doesn't always last a long time. Right. But there are people who come to us and then graduate out of us because they are still seeking curative treatment.
I get a lot of the graduates from hospice.
And there are some people, who
and
then
I take care of them for a while. When they get to a certain point where they start to really decline again, we often say,
some people,
maybe it's back to hospice again.
They graduate because they really do get better.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, often the research shows that people who come into hospice live 30 to 60 days longer than they would if they had just gone for straight aggressive treatment.
Wow, that's amazing. Carolyn, we are going to be ending the show. Give us what the website is for Capital
www.capitalcaring.org.
And Alan, what about DocTalker?
You can find us at www.doctalker.com.
Cool. Check those out. I want to thank you both for coming. It was very informative.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much.